Good morning, everybody. This is Stephen Pugh of the Home Bible College. I want to give you an introduction to the January studies for the second year students. Let me just give an outline first of all of the whole year. So in January, the second year students will be studying in Genesis and Exodus. In February, it'll be Leviticus and Numbers. In March, it'll be Deuteronomy, Joshua and Judges. In April, it'll be Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1 Kings. In May, it will be 2 Kings and 1 Chronicles and 2 Chronicles. In June, it will be Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Job, and the beginning of the Psalms. In July, it'll be the rest of the Psalms, and in August, it'll be the last of the Psalms. Then in September, we'll be looking at Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, and Isaiah. In October, we'll be looking at Jeremiah. In November, Lamentations and Ezekiel. And in December, all the rest. So it'll be Daniel, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. So the studies for the second year students will take us right through the whole of the Old Testament this year. And this is an amazing journey of discovery. Now, the first book, Genesis, which we call The Beginnings, is an Old Testament book, the first of the Old Testament books of 50 chapters, a large book written by Moses probably between 1450 and 1410 BC. Now, the name Genesis is taken from the Septuagint, which is a Greek translation of the Old Testament, in which the book was headed by the word Genesis. Now, the book of Genesis is one of the most important books of the Bible. In fact, they're all important, but this is a crucial book. It's a foundation book. The first 11 chapters cover half of Old Testament history, a period of over 2,000 years. And it describes the beginning of creation, of family, of sin, of language, of nations, and of the nation of Israel. The second part, which is 39 chapters, covers a period of only 350 years. It starts with the call of Abraham and ends with the body of Joseph in Egypt. And the key word in Genesis is the word generations. And generations just means the ongoing family. That's then, or rather, it means the origins. The origins. So in Genesis then we have, first of all, we have 4 events. We have the creation, the fall, the flood, and the Tower of Babel. And then we have 4 characters: Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. And then we have another way of looking at Genesis is that there are a number of phrases. You see, Genesis, like Matthew and a number of other books, gives its own gives its own divisions. You'll see an expression reoccurring. It'll say, and these are the generations of, and these are the generations of. So we have the generations of the heaven and the earth. That's in chapter 1 verse 2 to 6. And then we have the generations of Adam. Then we have the generations of Noah. And then we have the generations of the sons of Noah. And then we have the generations of the sons of Shem. And then we have the generations of Terah. And then the generations of Ishmael. Then the generations of Isaac. And then the generations of Esau. And then the generations of Jacob. So you can see, can't you, that this concept of the generations of is something that's key to the book of Genesis. Now we're going to be taking the whole of Genesis, and I divide it up into a number of sections. First of all, the first 2 chapters are what I call creation. Now from chapter 3 verse 1 right the way down to chapter 5 verse 32, I call it the fall. And in the fall we have sin entering into the world, we have the judgment of man, we have the expulsion from Eden, we have the story of Cain and Abel, we have the birth of Seth, and we have then Adam's genealogy. And then we have in chapter 6 a new section which begins in chapter 6 verse 1, goes down to chapter 9 verse 29, in which we have described what I call the flood. The flood. It's all to do with the flood. Evil takes control of mankind, but Noah finds grace in the eyes of the Lord. Then we have a description of the flood itself in chapter 7. And then in chapter 8 we see that once the flood is over, God remembers Noah. God remembers Noah. Then in chapter 9 we have the blessing of Noah and of his sons, and they are brought into the covenant with Noah. The whole world, including all the animals and the creatures in it, enter into this new covenant, the covenant of Noah. Then in chapter 10 verse 1 we have a new section which I call the Tower of Babel, and this is the last of the four great world events. We have, first of all, in chapter 10 Noah's genealogy, and then we have the description of the Tower of Babel at the beginning of chapter 11, and then we have Shem's genealogy, and then we have Terah's genealogy. What's happening is that as the families of the earth enlarge after the flood, so God's focus becomes more and more pointed. It comes right the way down to Abraham. So in chapter 12 verse 1 right the way down we see the call of Abraham. God speaks to a man who was an idol worshipper in the city of Ur, and he takes him and he blesses him. So the story of Abraham then begins in chapter 12, and it's the story of his life, his ups and his downs, the things that he did well, the things that he did not so well. It's the story of his life. It comes right the way down to chapter 23 verse 1, well verse 20 really, in which Sarah dies and is buried. Now of course Abraham continues to live on, but the story now picks up with a new character, and the new character in chapter 24 verse 1 is Isaac, the son of Abraham, who marries Rebekah. And by marrying Rebekah, the story switches over to his life, and his life continues on down. Abraham marries again, he marries Keturah, and then finally Abraham dies and is buried. We have Ishmael's genealogy, we have Isaac's twin sons, we have Isaac moving to Gerar, and Isaac's covenant with Abimelech. Then in chapter 27 verse 1 we have the story switching over to Jacob, and it all starts with Jacob deceiving his father. How sad. And then we see that Jacob runs away from Esau, and the whole story of Jacob's life unfolds, and again it's ups and downs, it's triumphs and disasters right through, and we come right the way down to chapter 35 where Isaac dies and is buried. And then we have Esau's genealogy. Then in chapter 37, a new person comes on the scene. He's already been born, but this is his life now taking off. In verse 1, Joseph has a dream, and then he is sold into slavery, and we have the story of Joseph in Egypt. And so the story moves on, and it goes ups and downs until finally at the very end the family move into Egypt, and Joseph comforts his brothers, and Joseph then dies and is embalmed in Egypt, but with the promise that they won't leave him there, that when God takes them out of the land of Egypt, Joseph will go with them. Okay, so it's a very interesting point that all through the wanderings of the children of Israel in the desert for 40 years, they carried with them a sarcophagus from Egypt. Joseph went with them. Now in the next book, which is Exodus, it speaks of the deliverance of Israel. This is an Old Testament book, the second of 40 chapters written by Moses. And the book of Exodus continues the story which began in Genesis. The Israelites lived for 400 years in Egypt. It's thought that after an invasion of the Assyrians, the Egyptian pharaohs took on a very different character. They knew nothing of Joseph and were afraid of the strength of the Hebrews amongst them. The Egyptians began to oppress them and to turn them into slaves. And the book of Exodus then describes the deliverance of Israel from Egypt by the hand of Moses. And Joseph has brought them in, but it is Moses that leads them out. Now 70 people entered Egypt, but it is thought that they numbered about 2.1 million when they came out. Egypt was one of the most developed civilizations of its day, and Moses was thoroughly taught in all the wisdom and sciences of Egypt, but Moses was not yet taught of God. And so at the age of 40 he fled to the backside of the desert, where he worked as a lonely shepherd. All of God's true leaders were shepherds. And at the age of 80, God spoke to him and told him to go to Egypt to deliver the Hebrews, but Moses felt unable to do so, so God gave him his brother Aaron, and Aaron was the spokesman, but Moses was the leader. Finally, God had got his man. And so the story of Exodus, strangely enough, is summarized for us very, very nicely in the letter to the Hebrews in the New Testament in chapter 11, verse 23. It says this: "By faith Moses, when he was born, was hid 3 months of his parents, because they saw that he was a proper child, and they were not afraid of the king's commandment. And by faith Moses, when he was come to age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he had respect unto the recompense of the reward. By faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. Through faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, lest he should be destroyed with the firstborn, lest he that destroyed the firstborn should touch them. By faith he passed through the Red Sea as by dry land, which the Egyptians, essaying to do, were drowned." So that's Hebrews chapter 11. Now, the book of Exodus divides into 3 parts. We have, first of all, Israel in Egypt, and then we have Israel in the desert, and finally we have Israel at Mount Sinai. So in Egypt there was slavery and oppression. We have the birth of Moses. We have Moses returning back, and Moses bringing the plagues and finally the Passover to the Egyptians. And then we have the second section, which is Israel in the desert, where they're leaving Egypt, they cross the Red Sea, and they're complaining in the desert. And then we have Israel at Mount Sinai. We have the giving of the law of God, the tabernacle instructions, the sad incident of the golden calf, and the construction of the tabernacle. So this is a big book. It's going to be a great adventure. There's just so much to learn, and I don't know it all. I'm going to be learning with you. We've been going through these studies for about 8 years and more than that. I've been reading these passages all my life, but this is going to be a great adventure. I'm looking forward to going through it with you, and please bring your questions. So every day there will be a passage, there will be a small commentary of mine, and there will be questions for discussion. This is where you come in. This is where you do your thinking. It isn't about what I think, it's what do you think? What is it that you can discover? And of course we have this tradition of having a password every day. Find something in the passage every day. Ask the Lord to give you something that strikes you, something that interests you, something that's educational, something new to learn every day. So get into the passage and come online and share your password and ask your questions. And at the end of the month, submit your notes. We love to read people's notes. We find it so stimulating. It's absolutely wonderful. We'll look forward to speaking to you as the month goes on. Those of you that aren't, we'd love you to register as a registered student. This enables you to have all the facilities of the Home Bible College. And don't forget, every day there's a video that will go up, which is just my thoughts and comments on the passage of the day. Well, God bless you. I look forward to speaking to you during the month. Have a great day, and God bless you. Bye for now.